Welcome to Building Community. I'm your host, Donna Rodriguez. Today, as part of our ongoing conversation about individual and community health and wellness, we'll be focusing on social wellness. Humans are social animals. We need productive, healthy personal relationships in order to optimize our physical, emotional, and mental health. Joining me for today's conversation, we have Dr. Catherine Morrison. In addition to an impressive body of work relating to prevention of domestic violence against women, she has also created programs to help women bring balance to their lives and works to assist in integrating holistic health practices into the community. Dennis Carman, the Executive Director of the United Way of Greater Plymouth County, has served communities for over 30 years through health and human service provider agencies. He's given service to people struggling with homelessness, substance abuse, and most recently through his work at the United Way. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
I've been really excited about this episode. I am so fascinated by all of the studies and all the information that's out there about the importance of social wellness. And I'd love to start to throw it out to the two of you and see, what are your thoughts? What do you think it means to be healthy socially for people?
Well, just in my estimation, social health really is about those really healthy relationships that you have with yourself, with your partners, within the community, and society as a whole as well. So social health is very vital to our overall health and well-being, and a lot of people, I think, really need to pay more attention to how healthy their relationships are.
And it's really interesting because some of the studies I was reading even compare the importance of being socially well to being a non-smoker. Duke University did a study that people who are isolated, that don't have healthy connections, it's as dangerous as being an active smoker.
Well, and I think what you find is when people don't have the supports of other people in their lives, that it's much more challenging to help them. When you're reaching out to people and they don't have that kind of a network of people they can rely on to be supportive, because no one program model is going to be successful. We often find that the most important resources in the nonprofit world are not the dollars to fund the programs, they're the people surrounding the people that you're trying to help.
And it's not just casual relationships. These are relationships that are important to us and are really healthy. Tell us a little bit more about what you think goes into a healthy relationship.
Those healthy relationships are absolutely vital. It's a relationship where you feel safe. It's a relationship where you feel supported by someone. If you have a person, like a lot of youth actually go through this a lot, they feel unsupported by their community and by their families as well. That leads to a lot of depression and anxiety. But when you actually have a young person who's in an environment where they feel heard, where they feel understood, and they feel very secure, you're going to have a very healthy young person and subsequently grow into a healthy adult as well.
And I think when you have those relationships that make you feel supported, it also helps to increase your confidence and your ideas of what you can do as an individual and also to support your community.
Well, if you start to think about the times when someone encouraged you to do something, I mean, when you look back, and when I look back in my life and I say, would I have performed musically if someone hadn't said, hey, you sing pretty well, or gee, that's great, and even when you didn't think you were doing well, to encourage you to say, if you really love it, keep doing it. Those people around, and I agree with what you're saying about the idea of the important relationships, not just the casual ones, the people who stick by you, who are there for you, not just because they're looking to get something from you. They're there invested in your happiness and your well-being, and it's incredible to watch what can happen when a person has those kind of people in their lives.
I think just to piggyback on that, a lot of people spend way too much energy in relationships that are not serving them or the other person. In other words, it's a very unhealthy relationship. So if we're talking about somebody who's in an abusive relationship, that's not some place where somebody should invest their energies. But even in friendships as well, I think a lot of people hold on to people who they think are friends when really that person's just generally bringing them down and not supporting them at all.
So being able to sometimes take a step back and find a way to honestly start to evaluate the relationships that you choose to have in your life.
Absolutely.
To ensure that they're ones that are going to help to support you to be healthy in every area.
Absolutely.
And I think the challenge that young people find are those role models of what does it look like to be in a good relationship. We don't talk very often in terms of sacrificing for each other, someone who will give their time up in order for you to accomplish something or to support you, that they're taking away from their time. We often find relationships where someone is getting something something. And I think, you know, healthy relationships are where you've got a nice reciprocity. You're giving, you're getting, there's an exchange, there's a communication, there's an empathy. You feel when the person is struggling, you're aware of that, you adjust, you take some time. And then they take some time for you as well. I mean, that's the other side of it. It's a two-way street, and when you see that two-way support going on, then I think you've found healthier relationships rather than what you were referring to earlier as those draining, toxic, destructive relationships that sadly are so common in our world today.
But by supporting the other person as much as yourself, whether it be a friend, a family member, an intimate partner, that you are helping yourself to grow as well.
Absolutely.
Now, let's talk a little bit, and I don't want to focus on negative, but let's talk a little bit about what are some of the negatives that we do see when people maybe either don't have healthy relationships or if they're isolated and don't feel that they have connections to others. You know, depression, mental health issues aren't obvious. What are some of the other things that you might have seen in your either interactions with people or in your work?
You also see high rates of anxiety. You see high rates of low self-esteem in a lot of individuals who are suffering in isolation. You also see some resultant health issues as well, not just mental health, but physical health. You have people that have poor general health, higher rates of cardiovascular disease, even higher rates of chronic pain in a lot of these individuals, which is something that really is something I hope that we can avoid in the future.
And I think that's where talking about health on a community basis comes into play. People being able to connect to others. We see some groups of people in our communities, for instance, the elders. If somebody is living home alone, may not have family members nearby, if they're not feeling connected, you know, that's when groups such as senior centers, where they can reach out to people, can really help people to start to develop relationships.
Some of the consequences of our world in the mobility it takes to get our job, for example, causes families to be separated and apart from each other, whereas generations in the past would have families literally living with each other to several generations. And so you didn't have that, the elder who was isolated and by themselves. Now you've got folks who are living literally states away from each other, sometimes, you know, other sides of the coasts and all. It's very challenging with those families to stay together, not just as basic communication, but to get some kind of support that they might need. So we're seeing the economies, we're seeing our society having us do things that really separate us very often. We almost have to fight that current in order to get back to those positive relationships and that kind of support. And I do think that there are an incredible amount of negative consequences to our separation from each other.
And one of the ways that we can actually try to come together and help these people who are living in isolation is something that I like to call natural helpers. And a natural helper is the neighbor next door who lives next to you, who's always concerned about your health and well-being. I'm lucky enough to have one of those neighbors who says, hey, you didn't tell me that you were going on vacation a while ago. I was worried about you. That's a natural helper, somebody who is instinctually in tune with the community, and it's not energy draining for them to actually keep up with everybody who lives within the neighborhood.
And those are things that we can do as individuals, that we can contribute to our community. Because I think, as you mentioned earlier, Dennis, you know, in addition to families maybe being separated, we have become, in many ways, a society that is not necessarily connecting with the people around us. We drive home from work, we park our car, we go into our house, we turn on our computer or our TV or our gaming system. We might be connecting to families maybe through the internet, but we're not connecting to everybody else around us.
I remember seeing a picture on the Facebook of someone who said, we don't really, when we were growing up, we didn't need GPS devices to know where kids were, and they'd have this picture of these bicycles strewn across some one of the kids' lawns to say, that's where we are. And if you think about it, we hung together to play baseball games. We physically were with each other for a good part of the day. We spent our summers together, so much so that, you know, the battles that we all go through occurred. But today, everyone is involved in things like video games. They're involved in individual things that they do that don't require that kind of group of people getting around. I mean, we don't see a lot of families or friends hanging out in bands together. We see a lot of, you know, microphone work. I can do the karaoke, but I don't need anybody else. You know, I got technology to supplant some of that. And I think we need to kind of look at what we're missing. We don't have as many neighbors as we used to have. We don't refer to neighborhoods very often that we used to do it. We live in a home. We're lucky to know a few of our neighbors these days, whereas when you were growing up, you knew the people all the way down your street, you knew the people in the next neighborhood, you knew the people in 3 or 4 neighborhoods away. We don't have that connectedness these days, and I think we've lost a lot because of that.
And we're living more in single households now. So I happen to be one of the thousands, if not millions, of Americans who actually lives by herself. But you've got a lot of people that are not living in a communal home anymore. They're just living by themselves, and that causes a lot of isolation as well.
And I think that in addition to people not being supported individually, if we are more isolated as we have become an insular, I think it can also lead to some of the dangers and some of the problems we're seeing. You know, increases in crime, even in the schools, bullying. If you're not feeling a connectedness to somebody, you don't have that social conscience and need to help to care for them. And it does concern me when I see those things increase, and I think it all comes back to how we are connecting to one another on a regular basis.
It really breaks my heart when I think about someone who is, you know, suffered from cyberbullying, because my thought goes to, where are their friends? Because in my day, I was bullied at certain times in my life, and yet I had other people around me who I could go to. Today, it seems as if when that happens, we barely know. Families barely know that kind of intimidation is going on. And really a sad thing. And again, the struggle we have is to fight that current and get back to senses of community and senses of relationships that are valuable and important and supportive of what we're doing.
And I think we're going to take a brief break, and when we come back, I would really like to focus on what are some of the positive things that we can be doing individually in our lives, that we can be doing to support the people around us, and then ultimately our communities. Thank you so much for joining us for Building Community. We'll be right back after this break.
As a father and youth sports coach in Pembroke, I started this coalition to combat the South Shore's drug epidemic. We're focused on minimizing the existence of local substance abuse through the education of our youth while supporting families impacted by drug addiction. Our goals are to provide formal education for youth about the risks of drug use and susceptibility of addiction, to encourage healthy decisions, lifestyles, and relationships while promoting self-confidence and individuality, and to provide direction for families seeking help in dealing with the stressors and challenges of having a loved one suffering from addiction. For more information, email us at pembroketad@gmail.com.
Hello, I'm Lucy. And I'm Flynn. We want to tell you about the Duxbury Education Foundation. For 25 years, DEF has funded grants to improve the education of Duxbury students. Any teacher in the Duxbury school system may apply for a grant each year. Funds for the DEF grants come from generous donations as well as community events, such as the 4th of July Road Race and the annual Phone-Thon. This year, grants included funding for robotic kits, laptops, pottery wheels, gym equipment, and preschool materials, among others. Remember, when you donate to the DEF, you are not only investing in the future of Duxbury, you are investing in the future of the world we live in.
Welcome back to Building Community. I'm Donna Rodriguez. In this episode, we're talking about social health and wellness. And my guests are Dr. Catherine Morrison and Dennis Carman from the United Way. We've been having such a wonderful time in this episode with our conversation. I've really been enjoying it. When we left, we were talking a little bit about some of the dangers of isolationism. And to wrap that up, I think the last point I'd like to discuss is just when people feel disconnected, we don't feel a responsibility, I think. And I wonder if that really is where we're seeing some social problems that are increasing in our communities. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree. I think that we are a very individualistic society. We're not really about community as much as we could be. I think we're all about who's king of the mountain, who's going to be first, and we're just very self-focused that way. It's a perfectly natural and human thing to do, but it's causing a lot of social issues and a lot of health issues among individuals as well. So yeah, I think it's a really huge problem that we're not actually connecting with one another.
I think you see it in a lot of the media. We've got reality shows that always seem to be competitive. Someone is on the top, which means everybody else loses. And we're almost cheering for people to fall by the wayside, you know. And I think we need to get back to recognizing that people are precious. They're our best resource. And if that's true, then everything else are tools. Everything else are things that should be supporting that. So technology is great, and I have every respect for all of the new technology. I don't understand half of it, but the truth of it is they are just tools. And when we replace them as the focus of what we're doing instead of the people that we're supposed to be, you know, benefiting from them, then I think we're making some pretty significant mistakes. But so I think it all goes back to people-centeredness. Let's recognize how precious people are and work toward supporting activities that get people together, that get them working collaboratively, that get them to supporting each other, and being aware of when people struggle and fall by the wayside, that when someone falls, it matters. Because other people, you know, it's not just an isolated person falling out of you know, the mainstream. It has an effect on other people. That person's life affects other people's lives. I mean, as corny as it sounds, It's a Wonderful Life. You know, you need to reflect on how many people we each connect to, and if we're not supported and we fall, then other people suffer and other people miss out. And I think in that great diverse fabric of life, we need all the threads, because then it becomes this beautiful tapestry, and it becomes a wonderful thing for everybody to enjoy. And when we're frayed and when we're unraveled, I think that's when we start to see all these problems that we're talking about earlier.
And you definitely see the effects spread, and you see it spread quickly.
Yeah.
Now, what are some of the things or examples, things that you think we can be doing individually on a day-to-day basis? I start with thinking about children. There's a phrase that I love, free-range children.
Free-range children.
You know, we grew up, as you said earlier, we got home from school, we changed, we went outside. When it got dark out, we came in for dinner. Or at 6:30, Mom would go to the back door and call our names, and we would come scattering from, you know, whoever's yard we were in at the time. Yeah. Now there are play groups. It's organized. You don't have the neighborhoods. You don't have children having the opportunity to experience being children and really connecting with each other. I see my niece and nephew sitting at the dining room table texting back and forth to pass the bread. You know, I think there's
in the classroom too.
Yes, in trying to protect our children sometimes, or in us not necessarily being as connected with our community, I think we might be taking away their opportunities to really experience being connected to one another.
Absolutely. I think the technology that you were referring to earlier really plays a significant role in this as well. Technology nowadays is an addiction, plain and simple. You have, especially the younger generations, who cannot leave the cell phone alone, cannot leave the Xbox alone. I think it becomes the responsibility of those who are in charge of that child and who are helping to raise that child to actually remove a lot of that technology from the equation altogether and get them back out onto the playground. Because I grew up the exact same way, free-range child. I like that phrase, by the way, free-range child, running around having fun. Nowadays, even on my block, a lot of the children don't even know each other. And I find that to be very concerning when that happens.
Because they don't feel a responsibility to one another or taking care of one another.
And quite frankly, a lot of times I think that people believe that, oh, you know, this is your camp, I don't care about your camp, this is my camp over here. So the issue becomes, how do we inspire people to actually start becoming involved in each other's lives again?
Well, and I think that the free range, the misnomer of that is, you'd think that we didn't have any direction or any guidance, but the truth of it is, if you look at what we did when we were growing up, we had anchors in place. You didn't come home without your little brother in tow. And well, if you came back and your brother was hurt or injured or not there when he was supposed to be, the first question was, where's your brother? You know, and I think there was that responsibility of your friends and your family are important. And with our individualized activity, we've drifted away from those familial relationships, and we've drifted away from those ideas that we're responsible for each other. I think, and this is going to sound awfully old-fashioned, but we need to be reminded of values values about people being important, and we're responsible for each other. And I think we've been allowed to be lax about that. I mean, look at the groups today that are struggling with membership, the Kiwanis clubs, the Lions clubs, the Rotary clubs, those organizations that used to depend on people coming together for common purposes to benefit the community. And you'll look at them, and their memberships are aging, they're dwindling, and the younger generations aren't really being encouraged along those lines to get together in an affinity group, you know, for a purpose, for a cause. You'll find areas where some groups have found ways to do it with technology, by getting together and raising money and doing activities and projects. But it's rarer these days, I think, and so there's that need to pull people back together and find common values and common causes that will attract people and cause them to come together and support each other.
It's difficult when you're competing against media, though, because I think a lot of people use media and what's being portrayed on television programs, especially these reality shows. This is the model of how we should be. And
That's
I think
a scary thought.
that is a very scary, I mean, Kim Kardashians, whatever, those people. And I even see some of my students actually modeling what they see on TV. So where is the responsibility of the broadcasters to actually have more wholesome programming that actually provides a different model of how things should be? You know, I grew up with reruns on Leave It to Beaver, and that kind of let me know basically how life should operate and run. So I think there's a wider implication here as well.
I think the good news is that on a local level, what you're doing here, what you do at PAC TV, is a way to kind of introduce these important things that people don't know about. You know, you showcase the opportunities. You let people know there are communities supporting each other, whether it's taking care of the environment or taking care of our elderly, you know, friends and neighbors. There are needs out there, and you broadcast those. And I think that's so important to do, not only just to do it at a level here to say it exists, but at a local level. It's not far away, because we view TV, everything happening is almost unreal. It's a fantasy. It doesn't really, those people aren't getting hurt. Those people aren't losing benefits or things are happening to them. When we see it local, I think it means so much more. Because I have faith that when you're confronting people with realities, they respond. You know, we can get disheartened sometimes by the messages we receive in the media. I think we can get disheartened by some of the violence and the sadness and the isolation and all of that. But if people are given opportunities, if we can find those opportunities, I think people do respond as we should, human beings. We care for each other. But we need to be reminded, and we need to have opportunities to do that.
And you used the term model earlier, and I think modeling behavior, modeling in each of us taking responsibility for what we do to contribute to the social wellness of our community. You know, service, as you said, if it's not the Kiwanis Club, if that's not your interest, well, maybe it's helping out at the Council on Aging. Maybe it's being, you know, somebody who goes down to the beach to help clean up the beach, that you're doing something to improve your community. If you're bringing your family along in that, your social networks are going to know what you're doing. You're starting to encourage that. Being involved in your local government, caring about voting. You know, caring about what's happening in your city or your town, watching your meetings, knowing what's happening, because that's where you live. That is your community. And people who say, "Oh, I don't vote," "Oh, those politicians, those people," those are people giving service. So what can we do in little ways that helps to build on it?
I think even something as small as, when I was growing up, there was a barber shop down the street that everybody would hang out at. I don't really see that anymore. I was actually amazed when I went to Africa a few years ago, how many people spent time with each other, sitting on each other's porches, or standing in the middle of the street talking to one another. Nowadays, I walk down the street and I just say hello to somebody, they automatically scoot over to the side because they don't know what I'm up to. We have this innate distrust of each other that's also blocking that connection. But even just starting those little hubs of socializing, again, I think would be fantastic if we could do that.
And I started to see, and it's interesting because I think sometimes you'll see a backlash. When you see negative, you'll see a backlash that becomes positive. For instance, in Plymouth, very recently, there was a group that was started called America's Hometown Against Heroin. And we have such an epidemic in this area, and it took just a few people whose families had been impacted to say, okay, enough. What are we going to do to come together? And thousands, literally thousands of people have responded.
Yeah. And I think it's taking the stigma off of some of those things. We still seem to, where everything is supposed to be perfect, where everything is supposed to be so, everybody is athletic, everybody is musically talented, no one would succumb to an addiction. And it's ridiculous because we clearly know that there is an epidemic out there of people using and abusing substances. So if we acknowledge that they're out there, if we acknowledge it's okay, not that it's okay to continue to use, but we understand that these are human things. We all struggle, we sometimes fail. Can we help each other? And I think the miracles are in saying, here's a person who was headed down the wrong road with a heroin addiction, with the right intervention, with the right treatment, with the right support, the miraculous turnaround of that person. And those success stories aren't told enough. Sometimes they're not told because of the respect for the person's privacy. But we need enough of those kind of stories to let people know we can have things be better, and we need to be helpful to that process. I mean, I have been lucky enough to see someone coming in literally at death's door to a halfway house and given a couple months of food and support and AA meetings and people not, talking them down and talking them up. It has been amazing to see what happens. People are fairly resilient. But it's that, and I think you said it earlier, it's that kind of fighting against the current of what the media's messages have been sometimes, to say, no, that's not what it's about. And it isn't about always being the best. It's just about enjoying life. And that phrase, we were talking about it earlier, joy. We don't talk about joy. We don't talk about how important it is to enjoy each other's successes, to support each other in that. And when people are struggling, to give the good news, the positive stuff, and not so much the negative.
And it brings us right back to the beginning of our conversation earlier in the show, that important social relationships, you are able to support each other, therefore helping to build each other up. And when we're building each other up individually, we also then build our community. I have had such an amazing time. This has been a wonderful conversation, and sadly it's already ending. I'd like to thank both of you for joining us today, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for this episode of Building Community. In our next episode, we're going to be discussing occupational health and wellness. For replay times, resources, and more information, visit pactv.org. If you have show ideas, comments, or questions, email buildingcommunity@pactv.org. Thank you.